알았어. 다 되려야, 도마 하나버린 게 상관올래야. 아니? 공감사야겠다. 섬주셔야.
First of all, I would like
샘지도
to offer
되려야.
my greetings and wishes that
예,
you are well.
세라쉬나 섬자야서.
And first of all, I thought I'd like to make an announcement.
드린
So now the announcement is that today is the last day of the spring teachings. So the spring teachings in Bodhgaya are finishing today, but I think we need to continue teaching for a few more days, because if we think about next year, we would need to finish the 50 verses. And if we're not able to teach a little bit more this year, then we won't be able to finish it. So I thought we should continue the teachings for a few more days. But we haven't been able to completely establish what days were there. So tomorrow there will be no teaching. We'll check whether we need to do a teaching the day after tomorrow or whether to do one a few days later. And so I think we should determine this today. Otherwise, the actual spring teachings are done, but the teachings for this teachings for the spring teachings should continue for a few days, I think. So I thought I should announce that. And so when I speak about, so the spring teachings is finishing, but I think after the nuns go back to their own monasteries, they're traveling back to their monasteries, so that's no problem. Because when we go over the internet, we can all watch anytime we want. And I think there's no particular problem with doing that. So today, first of all, I would like to go through it in terms of the outline. When we talk about the teachings, we're talking about the way to follow the Guru. There are two parts. There's avoiding disrespect, and the second is how to be respectful. So there are these two parts. And so if we're speaking about the first of these, how to be abandoning disrespect, and this has 4 points. These are, first of all, abandoning criticism and denigration. Second is abandoning upsetting the Guru. Third is explaining the unseen faults. And fourth is a summary of those. So those are the 4 points. Now, among these, when you speak about the abandoning respect, there are 2 parts. There's teaching the abandoning criticism in general and a specific explanation. Now, all of this outline is taken based on the outline in Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary on the 50 verses. Now, among these 2 parts of teaching the abandoning criticism in general and a specific explanation, we have completed the teaching on abandoning criticism in general. So now we're talking about the specific explanation. And so, first of all, the first of these verses. Those great fools who criticize the Guru's feet will die from plagues, disasters, fevers, evil spirits, contagions, and from poisons. Now, if we take this according to Tsongkhapa's explanation, this verse and the next stanza up through and be killed by Vijnana Vinayaka spirits, those first 3 lines of the next stanza speak about the faults that will occur in the next times and days. So I think if we think about the Sanskrit and the Tibetan, Chinese, and English, so I put these all so you can see the correspondences between the original and the translations, but there's not so much time to speak about all of these. So I thought if you could just take a brief look at these. So that's how it is. So next, so when you are actually criticizing the Guru and actually thinking about it intentionally and denigrating the guru from your heart, then what will actually happen? Well, what it says in the Sanskrit commentary, the textual explanation of serving the guru, it's explained there. And I think this will be helpful if you can also see the verb. So I think it's better to explain it if you can see this. So what it says in the textual explanation of serving the guru is, says that and we've talked about the plagues and plagues, disasters, fevers. When we talk about plagues, it says being tormented by Vajra, fire strikes, floods, gales, famines, executioners, and so forth. And disasters, and so here the disasters or dangers means the dangers that arise from ghosts and hungry ghosts, monsters, demons, snakes, carnivorous beasts, and so forth. There's also the word in India, there's a word enemy. And so enemy means all those people who have like a blood feud with you. The third line, which reads evil spirits, contagions, and from poisons. This is the third and fourth in English. And so what it says, the evil spirits, or the jinn, are the sun, and the rest of the nine are the 12 mamos, such as Nanda and so forth. In other words, they take away sentient beings' complexion and strength. So they're called graha, or grasping spirits. Contagions here means like illnesses that come from wind, biofilm, and so the combination. So it's the different types of illnesses that occur. When we talk about poisons, there are the plant, animal, conducted poisons, and transformed poisons. So there are four different types of poisons. In any case, there are things that if we eat, then they will be able to kill a sentient being. So that's what we should understand. That's what we understand them to mean. Notice the line that says, those great fools who criticize the Guru's feet will die from them. It says that of all of the things that I've talked about, all of the plagues and disasters and fevers and the spirits and fires and so forth, all of these will take away the life or destroy the life force of an individual who has criticized the Guru. Now, the way it's described in the Tibetans is that we talk about the first word is plagues. I say this is like an epidemic. For example, like the COVID-19. Well, when we think about it, it's actually generally like contagious diseases. And the disasters or the dangers are like understood to be meaning dangerous wild beasts. And contagions refers to various different types of illnesses. And then the jinns, or the evil spirits, refers to all the different maharagas and other types of spirits. And then contagions means the uncurable dangers, that if you get them that are difficult to cure. And so this is what it means. And poisons. Are like poisonous plants, or like the poisons from venomous snakes. Or there are also poisons that are concocted by people. That's what they should. And it says those great fools will die from them. What it means by great fools is when those great people have done the great misdeed of criticizing the Guru. They don't see that they've done such a terrible thing, so they're called great fools. So those great fools who have criticized the Guru will die from the plagues and so forth. We have just mentioned the plagues and disasters and so forth. So these will take away their life. Then following this, to continue. They will be killed by tyrants, snakes, water fire Dakanis, bandits, and Vigna and Vinayaka spirits, and then they will go to the hells. This is what it says, right? So what this teaches, according to Tsongkhapa's commentary, as I said before, it says that first stanza and then the first three lines of these up through and Vigna and Vinayaka spirits. So all of these are talking about the visible faults, the faults that we will see in this life from criticizing the guru. And then the last line, and then they'll go to the hells, teaches what will happen in the next lifetime. And of course, it teaches what will happen in the next life below, but here is we're talking about the visible faults and the unseen faults, but they will be talked about in more detail later. So here, to explain about these, if we talk about it in terms of the Sanskrit commentary, the textual commentary in Serving the Guru, so that says the kings or tyrants. The king, and so it attaches it. So it says, so the kings means the tyrants means those the result of people who kill this will be killed by tyrants and so forth, and then sent down to the hells. So a king, of course, means a king themselves. It's the king who rules over land, someone who rules over land. But another way of understanding it can also be understood as the king, like the great kings of Vaishravana and so forth, the great master of the Kuhyaka spirits. So you can understand as a human king or as the Yaksha kings and other kings that are taught in the secret mantra, Vajrayana, the lords of the secret mantra. The word thieves here is not explained here. It's not explained in this word thieves here. So there's no particular description of this word thieves, but there's the word fire. So fire, so anala means fire, and that means fire itself. So you've got fire and water to mean fire and water themselves. When you talk about vipers or snakes, this means venomous snakes and stuff. But actually not only snakes, but it also can include animals that if they bite you or sting you will poison you and kill you. So it includes all of these. And so then when you continue, it says Dakinis. This means, like, of course, the Dakinis. And here the Dakinis are the Dakinis that eat flesh and drink blood. So it should be understood as this kind of Dakini. Water here means water itself, right? And then it says, here's another the word thieves again, or here robbers. So here it means robbers or bandits. So bandits who will steal you. So above we had the word thieves above. And then we have the Dun, so this means the Vigna spirits. So the gods such as Brahma. We talk about all the divine spirits and the Naga spirits and so forth. Then there are also the false guides, or the false guides are the Vinayaka spirits. And so these are like probably the first false guides, just Ganapati, the great. So they should be understood like the Vinayakas, including Ganapati. And then the word and says, so with that, the nominus includes all of the Kinnaras and Maharagas and so forth. So they're all included in that. So all the kings and so forth and false guides, if you criticize the guru, and they will kill you, and you will go to the hells. And so for that reason, you should not criticize the Guru even in your dreams, is what it says. Now, the way it's described in the Tibetan commentaries is that king is like the punishment of a king, the punishment of a tyrant. Now, these days, there aren't so many kings, but there are all the kings. But we can understand it as much as talking about the execution and harm that comes from violating the law, the judicial executions and so forth. We talk about these. As I talk the Vigna, these are like the vectors of the so forth. When we talk about fire and water and so forth, these are when they kill you. And then after you die at an untimely death or an early death, then you will go to that Paramita home. So the main point here is that in general, if you criticize the three jewels in general, and in particular Dharma with whom you have a Dharma connection, if you disrespect them and criticize them, it's a grave offense. Moreover, in the secret mantra, we talk about the discussion like the 10 conditions for being liberated. When we're doing the wrathful among the 4 different types of activity, there's the wrathful activity. And so there are the people who are the people who are the objects of the liberating action of killing of those beings. So there are 2 different conditions that they must be fulfilled. And one of these 10 conditions is that someone who criticizes the Guru and jewels, it is said. So in this way, so criticizing the Guru, if you're criticizing that, then you become an enemy who fulfills the 10 conditions for being liberated. And if you can fulfill that, then I think it's very difficult to hope for to develop any experience, realization, qualities, and the like. So for this reason, people who criticize the Guru and the 3 jewels and so forth, this is something we need to be very careful about. So I think there are some stories about this. I think if I only teach the text, I think there's like no real point to it. It's good to tell some stories about this. Now, one story is that if we forget, if someone's not a little bit disrespectful, even if you're not just a little disrespectful, there are many stories of this, and one of them, one story is that in Tibet, there is the Cha lineage. This is a family lineage, or the Cha lineage. Now, this Cha family lineage was a very important family lineage. And there were many different translators in that lineage, and one of them was called Chalsunam Gyatsen. And he was a very famous student of Naropa, who was from Nepal. His name was Pamtingpa. So Chal was a student of his. So Pamtingpa was translated the Hevajra Tantras into Tibetan and became very well known. So Chalsunam Gyatsen was initially a student of Guru Lotsawa. So the Tanak Guru. There's a translator named Tanak Guru. This is not the Guru Lotsawa Shunapal, but another one named Tanak Guru. He was, I think, a student of Atisha, I believe. Anyways, he was a student. So Chalsunam Gyatsen was a student of his, but he didn't have many things to offer. He didn't have a lot of wealth. So for that reason, he couldn't have much to offer. So in the old days, the great lamas in Tibet, in particular the great translators, if you wanted to receive the empowerments and so forth from them, you had to make offerings to them, and you had to make big offerings. So he had nothing to offer. So he was unable to receive the Guhya Samadra Tantra and the empowerment and the teachings from Guru. And so for that reason, he went south to Nepal. And when he went to Nepal, he asked, like, who here is learned in the Dharma? And he's asking all around, and he was told that that there's Pam Timpas, direct disciple of Naropa, who had, excuse me, Paljit Mitrapa, direct disciple of Naropa, and he was a Siddha who has received all the teachings like being filled from a vase. And so he lived at a place called Pipiharana. And so everyone suggested this. And so this Jalsunanga went to Paljit Mitrapa. So I think this is probably the name of Pantingpa. So he immediately went to meet him. He went to meet the guru. And when he went to go see them, then at that point, the translator himself kind of took the lead and gathered many students, and they gathered all the necessary conditions, and they arranged a Gana Chakra. And so when they did a Gana Chakras, and of course, so in the past, when you had a Gana Chakra, you had to drink beer. And so all of his friends got drunk on the beer. And because then when they got drunk, they said various things. And when they said various things, then they said, oh, that guru, he didn't have a very good complexion. He was kind of dark. And he was a commoner. He was from the caste was being a commoner. And he didn't know Tibetan well. Because he didn't know Tibetan very well. All his Dharma friends are basically all Tibetan. And since they're Tibetan, they got drunk on the beer. And they started to sing a song. And what the song that they sang was, this thing is basically this Lama, the Newari Pamting, they call it, is well known, it says, but when you see him and you come to the throne, see him there, he looks like an old cow that's covered with silk. There's nothing else about him. And so this is the song that they sang. I don't know what they said it in. They must have sung it. They're in Tibetan, so they sang the song in Tibetan. But anyways, this is what they did. And so they had like kind of stained their samadhi. So there's a breach of their samadhi. Because he was saying various things to the guru. And immediately, there was in the Gana Chakra, there was a torma that was in the middle of that, in the mandala. And that flew up into the sky. And at that point, he didn't understand the Tibetan. When he saw the torma fly into the sky, he immediately recognized that those students were not receptive and they were not suitable vessels. And he immediately told them to leave. And he gave a hand sign saying, "You go." And he criticized them. He scolded them. So those who were singing the song, they said all these things like that he's like a cow wrapped in silk. And because they said this, they admitted they just couldn't say anything. They couldn't even get out the door. But the translator, Cha, he wasn't one of the ones singing the song. Because he wasn't singing that. He stayed where he was. And Cha, the translator, Cha, he didn't have any problem with this. Of course, he was not the most attractive guy, but he didn't lose faith. And he didn't have any breach in his Messiah. He said, "Please accept me as a student." And then the Guru Pamtempa gladly accepted and took him and gave Chao the empowerments of Neratma, Hevadra, and so forth. And he taught all of the 12 commentaries on the Tayavatra Tantra. And so then Chao's activity really spread widely, flourished. So when you talk, the Guru, might have a bad complexion and all this. It's not really that important. But because it's just a little bit of a lack of faith or just a small criticism, because of that little bit, there was like a breach and there was a bad connection. And so I think this is one reason why so that the secret mantras are so powerful or so strong, strict, is because of that. Now, there are many other stories about that, and there's some that I've heard myself. For example, the 16th Karmapa traveled all over the world, in the East and West, and everyone had faith in him as an actual Buddha. And so he went to many countries where the Buddhism had not been there before, and when he went there, Buddhism spread. And he was like an incredible guru who appeared, but that even within his monastery, there were people who were disrespectful of him. And some even derided him, looked down on him. And there were a few people who even criticized him in private. So one of them was an Umze. So this Umze, so this chant master Umze, because he was well learned, but he is kind of like he had a bad streak inside of him. So in the latter part of the Rigpa Dorje's life, Rigpa Dorje had diabetes. And so because he had to go to the bathroom frequently. So one time during a Vajrakilaya puja, the Karmapa Rigpa Dorje said, please finish the session quickly. But the Umze just immediately kind of, it went even slower. Intently went even slower to kind of to that end. And so that it said that Karmapa Rigpa Dorje even lost control over his bladder while on the throne. This is a really, bad streak in this guy, right? And it's not the only one. Another thing that I heard is that, I think this is true, in another puja, Rigpa Dorje called the Umze and said, the way you're playing the symbols is not quite right. And then when he criticized the Umze he said, what do you know? You don't have any more education than than the senior tea servant. So you're like an old tea servant, he said. So because in Rimtek, the old tea servers had very little. So the 16th Karmapa was very significant. Well, he was very strict, and then normally he'd Now at that point, the 16th Karma, his face turned dark, and he didn't say anything. And he said, may I never have to have anything to do with people like you again. And the people around us said something that he was like, really. And later, the Umze himself, he went into the retreat center. And while he was in the retreat center, what happened was that he left the retreat center, and he suddenly left the retreat center, and then no one knew what happened to him because they weren't sure what happened. So this is another story. Likewise, in the old days in Rimtek, there was a monk named Lutuk who was an attendant. And so the way he looked is they gave him like the kind of mean nickname of little sheep, or Luktuk, or touching the sheep. So his whole life long, he just only criticized, he never did anything but criticize Rigpa Dorje. And so later he went completely insane, as they say. So these aren't stories that are telling to scare you. It said, if you aren't careful, then this will happen to you. It's not trying to scare you, but it's showing that there are going to be faults that happen. We need to know that if that happens, then there'll be problems. If you think that if you have these problems, then nothing's going to happen, that's not going to be a benefit to you. Then it won't be a benefit. So for that reason, even people who have faith and pure view of the Guru, they always ended up, even if they have little difficulties in the front, in the end, they always turn out well. And these people who are disrespected their Guru, in the short term, might seem like things work out for them, or like people think that everything goes, but that things are okay with them, but in the end, things do not turn out well from them. Like during the cultural resolution, there are many people who fought with the They fought with the gurus or they destroyed students, like they fought with the gurus and they destroyed statues and so forth. And what happened is that after they died, they would give the bodies to vultures. When they gave the bows to these corpses to the vultures, then the vultures wouldn't eat them. They just wouldn't touch the corpses. This is not just in one area, but basically all over Tibet. Now, there are many stories of this all over. So I think this is something that we should consider, something we have to really consider. So next, I would like to speak about this. I'm talking about giving up, abandoning, upsetting the master. So the text reads, "You must never rile the mind of the master. A fool who does will certainly be cooked in hell." So now what this teaches is, as above, someone who criticizes the guru by denigrating the guru, criticizing it, as if they have, by just, if merely criticizing them has such great problems, and what happens if you actually upset the guru, rile the guru's mind? Now, if we explain this, it is unnecessary to say that upsetting them is also a great offense. So what Tsongkhapa's commentator says of this event is any of your behavior upsets the teacher's mind, if it really completely disappoints them. It's not just, it's like if it's like the really, not just that it kind of annoys them, but it really completely disappoints the guru. You should never do anything that actually really disappoints the guru, really upsets them. So if there's like a foolish student, because they're just too foolish, if they do some fault, then they'll definitely be buried in hell. So it says they'll be cooked in the hells. And saying they will certainly be cooked in hell because it's a fault, or definitely will produce the result of suffering. It's like that it's certain that it will do. This is like karma that will definitely be experienced. It's not that it might not be experienced. It definitely will be experienced. But you can confess it. Even if it's karma that will be definitely experienced, if you confess it with the four powers, then as it says in the great commentary on the 8,000, then that misdeed can be purified. The true Dharma has various different methods and ways. So even if you've done something terrible, but if you have a real regret for that and confess it and have the resolve not to do that, and you truly do this, then you can purify it. So if you please the guru, then you receive the blessings from their mind, and you receive blessings that are really distinctive blessings from the guru. And it's like receiving blessings that are different than those you receive from the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And so you receive these blessings. This is just well known. For example, it says in Mikya Dorje's prayer, "By these my roots of virtue," 3 times. But in this prayer it says, "No matter what I do, whether virtuous, evil, or neutral, may I only please him. May I never do anything that displeases him for even an instant." This is the aspiration that Mikya Dorje made. So if in order to please the guru and to not displease them, you need to make aspirations to do this. The reason why I have to make the aspiration is because if the guru is pleased, then you are climbing the basis or creating the basis for receiving the compassion and blessings. And if the guru is displeased or upset, there's basically no hope of receiving any blessings or siddhis. So generally, I think of talking about making the guru angry, upsetting the guru, or disappointing them. I think there's a little bit of a difference between the two. Because you can talk about, making the guru angry. Because it's possible that you can do something that's not quite right, that'll, anger the guru. I'm going to talk some small thing. You do something small, if the way you're doing the job isn't right, the way you're moving your hands is not quite right, then sometimes it's possible the guru will scold you. It's possible that they might even get angry. But when you talk about upsetting the guru or disappoint them, it's when your intentions and your actions are fundamentally mistaken, and the guru is upset and like they should be really disappointed or they should be. And if that happens, that's the great upset. And talk about upsetting the guru. It's like, totally disappointing the guru. And so this is, I think, what it means. Now, with this here, we talk a little bit about the incessant hell. So we do talk about it says that kind of as a digression, we talk about the incessant hell. It's talked about in both the sutras and the tantras. And in the sutras, among the 8 hot hells, the lowest of them is listed as the incessant. And so the incessant is a specific name of a specific hot hell. Now, in the Galachakra, it talks about the 8 great hells, but the incessant hell is not listed as one of them. Likewise, the Tantras speak about the Vajra hell. This term appears frequently, but the Vajra hell is also not one of the 8 great hells. That word does not appear there. It seems that the word itself does not appear. So when you talk about the Vajra hell, in terms of the Tantras, you can Karma Trinlipa, another master, say this is a general name for the hells. But some other scholars say that the 8th hell, the Vajra hell, is the 8th of the hells listed in the Kala Chakra and so forth. The last of these called the Vajra point of the needle hell. So then the question is, are the Vajra hell and the incessant hell the same, or are they different? Now, there are many different explanations of this. Most Kadampas, as well as the single intent of the Drikung school, explain that the Vajra hell and the incessant hell are the same. There are also some scholars who say that the Vajra hell has suffered that is even more intense than the suffering of the incessant hell. And so for that reason, they say that the Vajra hell and the incessant hell are different. But we don't have a lot of time, so I won't describe that so much. I won't say more about that today. Now, when we talk about the guru, we have to understand that we're taking it as a given that we're talking about a guru who has all the characteristics, an authentic guru. When we're talking about one who doesn't have the characteristics, doesn't mean we're taking it as a basis that it's a guru who has all the characteristics. And so once they're an authentic guru, anything they say is going to be beneficial for us. They won't, it's impossible that they'd say anything else. And because they're one of the characteristics is they must have great competition. When you're talking about a guru with the characteristics, there can be it's impossible that they wouldn't be someone who has great compassion. Because it's one of the characteristics that they must have is that they must have great compassion. And if they have the great compassion, then they're going to say things that are going to be beneficial for us. It's impossible that they would say anything that would harm us. And so when we do something that upsets the guru, the way we should understand that is it's not that it's just something that's different than what the guru wishes. It's when you do something that is contradictory to the karma or makes the wrong connections, the wrong interdependent connections, and that's what upsets them. So I think that the guru is upset is not because of their own purposes or not because of the guru's own individual purposes, because for an authentic guru, if it's upsetting an authentic guru or disappointing guru, is when we do something, doing something that doesn't benefit our own selves, or do something that if we do something that impedes us from bringing benefit to the teachings, that is what will upset the guru, offend the guru. So here, when we talk about take all the talk about anything that's taught about serving the guru and so forth comes after the master and student have examined each other. And so it clearly intends gurus have all the qualifications and actual receptive students. It's not just this secret mantra. The Mahayana Sutra tradition speaks about offering your body, speech, and mind to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. These words come up. Offering your body, speech, and mind to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then giving up non-virtue, the body, speech, and mind. That's about giving your body, speech, and mind to sentient beings, and using your body, speech, and mind for work for the sake of sentient beings. And saying you have to make your body, speech, and mind meaningful. And the way that you do this, I don't know how to do this myself. And so far I'm going to give my body, sentient speech, and mind to those who know how to do it, the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas. And then once I've done it, then I'll do just as they did. I'll do the activity of a bodhisattva as they said, and then benefit beings. And so this is what it means, like giving your body, speech, and mind to the students. And so this is taught in the sutras of the Mahayana. Likewise, in the secret mantra, it speaks about giving your body, speech, and mind to the guru, and then accomplishing whatever the guru says. And I think these come down to the same thing, that understood in the same way. If you're talking about as a guru who has the characteristics, that guru, no matter what they tell you to do, they'll only tell you things that are in accord with the Dharma. They'll only do things that help you with your practice. And if you can do that, then this is a way to bring yourself to the level of liberation and omniscience without any difficulty. And so when you say doing whatever the guru says, the main point of this is something we have to know. Now, when we talk about not upsetting the guru, then there's something that we can't avoid thinking about. And what that is that when the Karmapa Rigpa Dorje passed away, after that, there have been many events within our Karma Kamsan lineage. They happened. Now, before even the 16th Karmapa passed away, even before he went to America, he went to Hong Kong and then to America. But before he left Rumtek, he told everyone, he says, you have to get along together. You need to get along. You have to all be like birds in a nest. You have to get together and work together and be harmonious. And if you do that, then no one will be able to harm it. And so it's basically left this as like his testament, saying that his will, saying you should do this, but it did. In actual practice, it didn't turn out as he left in his testament. So it's not just a question of what happened after he passed away. Even before he did, there must have been some signs of discord even before he passed away. But as long as he was still alive, because he was alive, his majestic presence, he just overwhelmed everything. And so those with negative intentions really couldn't act on them very much. But after he passed away, it's like people thought, well, now we have the opportunity, and then they started acting out. Actually, but the karma was not like ordinary people like us. When a guru is like a Buddha, like the Karmapa, it's possible he can go to another line, but he can still actually look at us with the eye of compassion and see us. So his body is now no longer there, but he can. We should think that he's staying there, looking at us with compassion. And we should think this way and still be just as careful as when he was living there. But forget about being careful. There was no one to stop them from doing it. And people thought, I'm going to do what I want. And the conflict started. And so in the end, what happened is that the gurus and the monasteries broke into two camps, and then had like the one lineage broke into two factions, and we had gained a bad reputation internationally. And that's still what people can think about. We never think, I did this for the sake of the guru, I did this for the sake of the Dharma. And thinking like this is basically just fooling yourselves, or fooling ourselves. It's nothing other than that. Actuality, we couldn't have done anything worse for the guru or for the Dharma. So for that reason, we have the Karma Kagyu that has lasted for over 900 years from the time of Dusum Khyentse to the present, and we've been able to create a great stain on that history that no one else was able to do before. And so why was it such a bad problem? Whose fault was it? Whose mistake was it? And so at that time, we can't point our finger outside. We can't point at someone else. We need to point the finger at ourselves. We need to point the finger at ourselves, I think. If we're saying, instead we say, I'm not wrong, I'm right, they made all the mistakes, and point only outside at other people, then there's never going to be any time when we'll be able to see our own faults. It's like the great spiritual friend Longji Tangpa said, so no matter what profound scripture I read and open and read, then they all say that all the faults are my own, all the qualities belong to sentient beings. And because of this point, I need to give all profit and victory to others and take all loss and defeat on myself. I can't find anything else, any other way to understand it. And it's just as he said, the main thing is we need to look inside ourselves to see, what are my own mistakes? What shortcomings do I have? What is my problem? It's important for us to look at this. So if we look at the situation of other people, whether outsiders look at it, or if we look at other lineages, no matter who looks at it, they all say in the Kamsang lineage, they're all infighting. They say they don't really know, they don't really look at who made the mistake. They don't look at who made the mistake, whose problem it was. Now, the people in the rest of the world, they just don't know. They don't have time, and they don't really understand the situation. They just know that the karma comes, and this is the hearts and stone don't get along. That happens every night. And in the very end, then people who have never actually participated in this problem and don't know who did what or taught what, they don't know this. Even these innocent people have been sullied and stained by that conflict. And it's really given terrible difficulties to all of us. And so sometimes I think it's like this. It's like we have the Gesar epics. And we talk about there's the Shenpen Norduk. So there's the great Mongolian hordes. Later he surrendered to Gesar, and then Gesar made him one of the ministers of Ling. But at that point, there at Sashan Dima, they said, you can't do that. There's nowhere to that. Shenpa, the person who's lost a thing, so he lost the capital. We lost the capital. So if we do that, so I say there's no way that this can be. So they got in a fight. They got in a conflict. In the very end, what happened? They started looking for a Gesar. They started. All the ministers started looking for them at the very end, and what happened is that Jasa Shekhar then descended from the heaven. So he was in the heaven as he saw everything. So this divine being then And so you have the infighting and the civil strife within them is a very difficult situation. And so this divine being descended, Gyatso, followed to the honey, came to this and he said, you can't do this. You aren't allowed to do this. You need to listen to whatever says and do what he says. So Geso needs this person Shempa. He's very important for the future. And when he said that, then only then the minister Denma, he's like his mind completely changed. And from that time on, he did whatever Geso said. He listed it. And then Shempa and Denma then became friends. And so there's like this alliance between Shen and Denma. So if the 16th Karmapa were actually to like come, ministers actually about to come in front of us and appear to us again, what would happen for us? What would we all do? We have to think about it. We probably wouldn't dare to go see him immediately. Oh, I can't go to. I think, oh, he's gonna go criticize me. He's gonna scold me. Something's gonna be offended. We've disappointed him. When he looks at what we've done and what we've done, I think he's going to scold us. He's going to be disappointed. In any case, there are probably very few people would actually dare lift up their faces and look at him. I think it's difficult among us. So I think what we have to think about, look in the deep in our hearts, as we all have, I think we understand we have this kind of like these faults and regressiveness, but we don't, if you would admit that that we made the mistakes and that we regret things, and basically until the time of their deaths, I think I haven't done anything wrong. And so it's only then that it come up. But I said, as long as we're alive, I made a mistake. They won't accept I was a mistake and that I regret it. And so if we think about, because of the way we've acted and done things, all of our guru, the Kuru and Jewel, and the master of our teachings, the 16th Karmapa, we've disappointed him. We have upset him. We've done a lot of things that have caused that. But even now, it's like there's some people who just won't give up their own selfish instincts. And they continue to provoke things and they continue to act. And they do many things that they really shouldn't be doing. And so for that reason, in the future, I think that we all have to need to look at the 16th Karmapa in the face. And we need to think about the honor of the Kamsang teachings. We need to think about what will be beneficial for this life and the next. And if we want to be able to face the people of our country, it's important for us all to come together and to work harmoniously together. If we think, whose fault is it? Whose mistake was it? And we say it's their fault. They say it's our fault. And if that don't happen, then if we all stand like that, it's like there's no way that we're going to get over this. There's no way we'll get out of this situation. So we need to stop all that. And we need to think about in a situation, is this something that is what the 16th Karmapa would want, fulfill his wishes? It's not. No. When we realize that, then I think only then I think we can understand the situation. So next, to continue change, the third section is the unsolved faults, the faults that would occur in a future life. So this verse reads, it's taught that those who criticize the master will stay in the incessant and other terrifying hells. Now, I think in terms of the commentary by Lord Tsongkhapa, this I think the most complete. And so when it says, when they will go to the hells above, it's taught. This means all the hells that are taught in these tantras, such as incessant hell, the Vajra hell, and so forth. And so this includes the ones that have the greatest suffering. So these are the hells where those who have criticized the Guru will stay and experience suffering for a long time. And so this is extracted from as it says in the 5th chapter, the Root Tantra of Goya Samaja says, those beings who have done famous acts or terrible misdeeds can practice the supreme path, the great ocean of the Vajrayana. Those who criticize the Guru from their heart might practice, but will not accomplish anything. And so the one he explains this in his the Clear Lamp commentary says, those who kill their parents or an arhat, who draw blood from a Tathagata or reject the Dharma. So basically, people have committed the heinous act because of which they will fall into hell immediately after dying. And likewise, the people who have done the near heinous acts, the 14 root downfalls and so forth, even if they receive the complete phase of the Guru's kindness, then they can do this. You might have done a heinous act, but you can achieve the results through the secret mantra. However, someone who starts following a Vajra master as their guru, and later they think that guru is not doing anything but and they criticize that Vajra master. And if they criticize him, not just as, it's really unintentional, but if they criticize the guru from their actual bottom of their heart, and then if that individual cannot accomplish anything through the secret mantra. So for that reason, it's even a greater misdeed than rejecting the Dharma and committing heinous acts. This is the act of criticizing the Guru is even worse. So next is the 4th. And where's the 4th? This is the summary. This is the summary. So therefore you should put all your efforts toward never disparaging at all the greatly intelligent Vajra master who keeps their virtues fully concealed. So the meaning of this is that the bad results that come from criticizing the Guru are so extremely serious. And because of that reason that they're so serious, you should use all of your efforts and any power that you have to never disparage the Vajra master who has great experience, who has broad knowledge and knows a lot. And someone who also keeps their own great virtue concealed or hidden. So basic, someone who conceals their great virtues. So they have great knowledge and they have great virtues, but they're act as hidden yogis. And should never disparage someone like that. So in particular, those so in general, people who are students, and in particular, those who have students who have requested this is a guru who has, loving advice to students in general, in particular to those who request the profound Dharma. So they should be very careful of this. So not only your own guru who shouldn't practice. If you help those who help with other people who criticize others, is also a great impediment for achieving your own accomplishment, as explained before. So if you think about it in terms of the human dharmas, basically there's no one who's been more kind to us than our parents. If from the perspective of the divine true dharma, there is no one who's kinder than the guru and spiritual friend. And in particular, in the secret mantra Vajrayana, the guru is the root of samaya, the foundation of all practice, and the source of all accomplishment. It's very crucial for us to be very careful of them, to be careful, and we need to respect them, be careful of following them properly. Now, of course, in these days, the main people that people complain about are the lamas and the tulkus. Those lamas and tulkus people complain about. If we think about unreligious, worldly people, it's understandable because they don't really understand, what's important. But if you think about us monastics, in particular as our mantra practice, we have to be really careful. The reason for this is that when we are speaking, we end up speaking about what the guru does that isn't right. And I don't think this is good. If we don't have a Dharma connection with them, that's one thing. But it's one thing, but it's not so bad. But even if you don't have a Dharma connection, you just don't know who's a great being and who's a bodhisattva. So if you think, I don't have a Dharma connection, and then say whatever you want, that's not right. Because you don't know who's a great being or who's a bodhisattva. It's possible that even the old dog is outside is by, a cow outside might be a bodhisattva. So we have no idea who's the emanation of a Buddha or a bodhisattva, and who's a great being. We don't know. And if we criticize him, there's a possibility of committing a great offense. For example, business people in stores these days have to be very careful of who are there, and they have the storekeepers need to be very careful of who they're, because sometimes people, they don't know who's rich or not. These days, rich people may, if you look at them, they'd be dressed like beggars. People that come up wearing like really ragged clothes, and if they don't treat them well, and then there's a possibility that you lose the opportunity to make a good sale. And so if we understand it in this way, I'm thinking we have no idea who's like a great being or a bodhisattva. There's no way to know. It's a similar thing. So you can't just go around criticizing anyone. Now, if you have a Dharma connection, it's actually even more so that you must not complain about them. It's like I said yesterday. It's difficult to find a guru who has all the qualities and has no faults at all. So it's quite possible that the guru will have faults. You can't insist that they be someone who has no faults. They will have some faults. It's possible they will, but if they have a few faults, I think we need to be able to accept that. If they have a lot of faults, if they're big problems, that's a problem. But first of all, you have to look at them first and see. You have to compare their faults and their qualities. If they have more qualities, that's fine. And we can know that clearly. So we need to be able to accept someone who has a few faults. We think about it from one perspective. The gurus are the same as us. They're the same in being made out of flesh, blood, and bones, and having feelings of pleasure and pain. Because of that, we're able to associate them. We're able to be with them. We can eat with them. We can drink with them. We can have conversations with them. That's what happens, right? If we want a guru who doesn't have such an ordinary thing, but has an undefiled kaya or a body, then there's no way we could actually meet the guru. Like there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas may fill all the space. They're there. But we can't see them. We can't ask them any questions. We aren't talk to them. So it's basically the same as if you say they're not there. So there are those who have ordinary appearances like us, who have feelings of pleasure and pain. So sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're sad. And so that actually is actually beneficial for us. Like someone you could never possibly see. Somebody could ever, if you're waiting for someone to who you can never see or speak to, that's no problem. It's difficult. You need a guru that you can see, who can tell you, who can actually say, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this. Who can actually take you by the hand and guide you along. That's what's beneficial for us, right? Still, but the guru has an ordinary appearance like us, and someone who has feelings of pleasure, that's what we need. If we had to have someone who is greater than that, because we couldn't receive any Dharma teachings from them, we can't even see them, so how can we receive teachings from them? So if we think about it from one perspective, someone who has an ordinary appearance and that seems to have faults, there actually is actually a sign that we can gather the accumulation of evidence. It works out for us. But if they have a lot of faults, then that's something we need to be careful about, right? And first of all, it's important to say that someone who doesn't have faults, but once you follow them, even if you recognize that they're 100% faults, then you have to do that. You can't just criticize them. You should, separate yourself from them, get some distance. But to criticize them and to scold them, complain about this is not bad, because that'll disrupt the interdependence that would allow you to find a good Lama in the future. So this is something we need to think about. It'll be harmful. So I think that's all I have to say today. And so because we're not finished with that, so we don't need to have a mandala offering today. We'll just do as usual. And so today we will determine the time this evening. And then we will announce the times for the continuation of these teachings.